The alarms had been silent for 3 days on Meridian Station, which meant someone was about to die. Chen had learned to read the rhythms of the massive rehabilitation facility during his 2 years maintaining its endless corridors and life support systems. When the emergency alerts stopped screaming, when the medical staff moved with quiet resignation instead of urgent purpose, it meant they had given up on someone. Another broken soul had been written off as beyond repair. The gas giant Titan 7 rotated slowly outside the observation windows, its amber storms painting the station's halls in shifting golden light. David pulled his maintenance cart through the medical wing's lower levels, checking atmospheric processors and thermal regulators. The work kept his hands busy and his mind focused on problems he could actually solve. Unlike the problems that had followed him here from Earth. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The maintenance tunnels beneath Ward 7 were David's favorite assignment. Few people ventured into the narrow passages that housed the station's circulatory systems, where the hum of recycling units and the gentle whoosh of air filtration created a mechanical symphony that drowned out unwanted thoughts. Here, among pipes and conduits, he could forget about the screams that still echoed in his dreams from his time as a battlefield medic. He was calibrating a water purification unit when he heard it. Not a scream, but something worse. The sound of someone trying very hard not to make any sound at all. David paused, his hand still on the diagnostic panel. The breathing was ragged, controlled, like someone fighting against their own body. He had heard that kind of breathing before, in field hospitals when soldiers tried to hide how much pain they were in. Pride and pain made the same music. Following the sound deeper into the maintenance section, David discovered a service hatch that led to an abandoned storage chamber. The room had been sealed off months ago when the station underwent renovations, but someone had managed to access it from the inside. Someone who wanted to be forgotten. The chamber was small and dark, filled with obsolete medical equipment and broken furniture. In the corner, partially hidden behind a stack of decommissioned rehabilitation pods, sat a figure that made David's breath catch in his throat. She was Valari, that much was obvious from the distinctive ridge structure along her forearms and the elegant elongation of her limbs. The Valari were the galaxy's most feared warriors, bred for combat and trained from childhood to be living weapons. This one wore the tattered remains of what had once been ceremonial battle armor, now stripped of its power cores and decorative elements. But something was wrong. Her hands shook uncontrollably as she tried to grip a small water container, the tremors so violent that she couldn't bring it to her lips. When she attempted to steady one hand with the other, both began to spasm worse. Water spilled across her lap, and she made that careful, quiet sound again. The sound of someone who had learned that showing weakness meant death. David recognized the symptoms immediately. Severe nerve damage, probably from neural disruptor weapons. In humans, it would be treatable with time and therapy. But the Valari had different ideas about what constituted a life worth living. She sensed his presence and turned toward him with movements that were still graceful despite the tremors. Her eyes were the deep violet of Valari nobility, and they held an intelligence that was sharp and aware. She was not lost in madness or dulled by medication. She was simply trapped in a body that no longer obeyed her will. "You should not be here," she said in accented standard, her voice carrying the formal cadence of high-born Valari. "This section is restricted." David stepped into the chamber slowly, keeping his hands visible and his movements calm. "So are you, I'm guessing." Her violet eyes narrowed, studying him with the intensity of someone trained to assess threats. "You are human. Maintenance division, based on your uniform. David Chen, according to your identification badge." She paused, and her hands trembled violently as she tried to set down the water container. You should report my presence to station security. Should I? David moved to a nearby crate and sat down, making himself less threatening through simple body language. Seems like you went to a lot of trouble to not be found. I am no longer a concern of this facility. Her words carried the weight of formal declaration, as if she were reciting something that had been repeated many times. The Valari Council has decreed that I am Vashti. Dead while living, my treatment here has been concluded. David had heard the term before. Vashti was what the Valari called warriors who had lost their ability to fight. In their culture, such individuals were considered worse than dead. They were erased, their names struck from records, their existence denied. Most chose ritual, suicide rather than face such dishonor. But you're still breathing, David observed quietly. Something flickered across her features, shame, perhaps, or defiance. An oversight that will be corrected. What's your name? She hesitated, as if the question were a trap. I no longer have one. Everyone has a name. What did people call you before? Another long pause. Her hands continued their involuntary trembling, and she watched them with a mixture of disgust and resignation. Kira. My designation was Kira. Nice to meet you, Kira. I'm David. He pulled a thermal blanket from his maintenance kit and placed it on the crate between them, not offering it directly but making it available. How long have you been hiding down here? 6 days. Since the medical staff informed me that no further treatment was possible. Her voice remained steady, but David caught the slight tightening around her eyes. Since they explained that the Valari Council had requested my immediate departure. David had seen the medical reports that crossed his workstation. The rehabilitation facility treated beings from dozens of species, each with their own definitions of what constituted successful healing. For humans, any improvement was considered progress. For Valari, anything less than complete restoration to warrior status was failure. The nerve damage, he said carefully. Is it getting worse? Kira's laugh was bitter and sharp. It is stable, according to your physicians. I will never regain full motor control, but I will not deteriorate further. I am perfectly preserved. In my inadequacy. She tried again to lift the water container, and again her hands betrayed her. This time she made no sound, but David saw the way her jaw clenched, the way her breathing became more controlled. She was fighting a war against her own body and losing every battle. The tremors are worse when you're stressed, David observed, or when you're trying too hard to control them. You have medical training. It wasn't a question. Some field medic back on Earth, before I came here. David gestured toward the water container. Would you like help with that? The question hung in the air between them like a challenge. In Valari culture, accepting help with basic survival tasks was a profound admission of defeat. But David had watched enough soldiers struggle with invisible wounds to recognize the moment when pride had to give way to necessity. Kira stared at him for a long moment, her violet eyes searching his face for something. Pity, perhaps, or judgment. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. When she found neither, something in her posture shifted almost imperceptibly. Yes, she whispered. David moved slowly as he helped Kira with the water, understanding that every gesture mattered. His hands guided hers without taking control, allowing her to maintain what dignity she could while accomplishing the simple task that had become impossible. The water was warm and stale, probably recycled through the station systems a dozen times, but she drank it like it was the finest vintage from her homeworld. The medical staff believes I departed 3 days ago, Kira said after she had finished. They processed my discharge and assumed I had taken the transport to Valari space. But you didn't. No. She leaned back against the storage container. And for the first time since he had found her, Some of the rigid military posture left her shoulders. I could not return to a place where I no longer exist. David understood that feeling more than he cared to admit. Earth held too many memories of who he used to be, too many expectations he could no longer meet. So you came here instead. This seemed preferable to the alternatives. Kira's hands had steadied slightly now that she wasn't actively fighting them. Though I suspect that will change once station security discovers my presence. They won't hear it from me. David began checking the environmental controls in the small chamber, his engineer's mind automatically cataloging problems and solutions. But you can't stay here indefinitely. No proper air circulation, minimal heat, and I'm betting you haven't eaten in days. Hunger is temporary, dishonor is eternal. That's one way to look at it. David found the environmental panel and began adjusting settings. Another way is that you're still alive, which means you still have choices. Kira watched him work with the focused attention of someone trained to analyze tactical situations. You speak as though choice is always available. Your species has a different relationship with failure than mine. Maybe, or maybe we just define failure differently. David connected his diagnostic tool to the chamber's systems. What happens if a Valari warrior gets injured in battle but survives? They heal and return to service, or they die honorably. And if they can't heal completely? Kira's silence stretched long enough that David looked up from his work. Her violet eyes held something that might have been pain, though whether physical or emotional was impossible to determine. They choose death, she said finally. It is the only path that preserves honor, but you didn't choose that. No. The word came out like a confession. I did not. David finished his adjustments to the environmental systems and felt the subtle change as fresh air began circulating through the chamber. The temperature would stabilize soon, and the lighting would become less harsh. Small improvements, but they mattered. Why? He asked. Kira was quiet for so long that David thought she might not answer. When she finally spoke, her voice carried a vulnerability that seemed to surprise even her. Because I was afraid. The admission hung between them like a physical presence. David had spent enough time around soldiers to understand what it cost her to speak those words. Fear was antithetical to everything the Valari represented. Afraid of death? Afraid of. She struggled with the words, her hands beginning to tremble again. Afraid that if I died, it would be as though I had never existed. That everything I was before this happened would be erased along with everything I could never be again. David sat back down on the crate, giving her space to continue if she wanted to. He had learned that the hardest conversations happened when people weren't being pushed toward them. I was Kira Velthanis, she said, using what sounded like a formal title. Third daughter of House Thanis, guardian of the northern reaches, victor of Kepler Station. Her voice carried pride even as her hands shook. I commanded 12 wings of fighters. I have never lost a battle. I have never retreated from an enemy. That's an impressive record. It was my entire existence. From the moment I could walk, I was trained for war. Every breath I took, every thought I formed, every connection I made with others was filtered through my identity as a warrior. Her tremors worsened as she spoke, as if the emotional stress was manifesting physically. When the neural disruptors damaged my motor cortex, they didn't just steal my reflexes. They stole who I was. David understood now why she couldn't return home. The Valari didn't just expect their warriors to fight. They expected them to be fighting. It wasn't a job or a role, it was an essential nature. Without it, Kira wasn't just unemployed or disabled. She was fundamentally broken in a way her culture couldn't comprehend or forgive. The physicians here tried to explain that I could still contribute, Kira continued. They suggested roles in strategy, in training, in logistics. They couldn't understand that asking a Valari warrior to step away from direct combat is like asking a human to stop breathing. It might be technically possible, but it violates something essential. So you're caught between two worlds. The one that says you should die, and the one that says you should adapt. Precisely. Kira attempted to adjust her position, and winced as her coordination failed her again. Neither option feels like living. David watched her struggle and felt the familiar tug of a problem that needed solving. It was the same impulse that had made him a good medic, the inability to see suffering without wanting to address it. But this wasn't a mechanical system he could repair, or a wound he could bandage. This was something more complex. What if there was a third option? Kira's eyes sharpened with sudden suspicion. What do you mean? I mean, what if you didn't have to choose between dying as a warrior or living as something else? What if you could find a way to still be who you are, just differently? That is impossible, is it? You said yourself that you're tactical. Knowledge is intact. Your experience is still there. The only thing that changed is your ability to execute certain physical tasks. Those physical tasks define what it means to be Valari. According to who? The question seemed to catch Kira off guard. She stared at him with the expression of someone who had never considered that fundamental assumptions might be questioned. According to everyone. According to thousands of years of tradition. According to the very structure of our society. But not according to you. Kira's hands clenched into fists, the tremors making the gesture less impressive than it should have. Ben, it doesn't matter what I think. I am one person against the weight of an entire civilization. Sometimes one person is all it takes. David stood and moved to another section of the chamber, where obsolete medical equipment had been stored. Most of it was junk, but some pieces might still be functional. As he worked, he kept talking. When I was serving as a medic, I saw a lot of soldiers who got injured badly enough that they couldn't return to active duty. Some of them handled it better than others. The ones who did best weren't necessarily the ones who healed the most. They were the ones who figured out how to take what made them good soldiers and apply it somewhere else. That is different. Human military service is temporary. Valari existence is permanent. Maybe, but permanence doesn't have to mean stagnation. David found what he was looking for, a portable medical scanner that appeared to still have battery charge. Mind if I take a look at your neural patterns? Just curiosity. I'm not a doctor, but I've seen enough nerve damage to recognize patterns. Kira's entire body went rigid. Why? Because I'm an engineer, and engineers solve problems. I can't solve your cultural situation, but maybe I can understand your physical one better. The physicians here have already conducted every possible scan. The damage is permanent and irreversible. Probably. But they were looking for ways to restore your previous function. I'm wondering if there might be ways to work with your current function. That makes no sense. David activated the scanner and checked its calibration. When a system fails, you have two options. You can try to repair it to original specifications, or you can redesign around the failure. The first approach works. Sometimes, the second approach works more often. Kira watched him with the intense focus of someone trying to determine whether she was being offered hope or having her time wasted. David could see the conflict in her violet eyes, the war between wanting to believe in possibilities and protecting herself from further disappointment. The scanner will show you the same information the doctors already provided, she said finally. Maybe, but I might interpret it differently. And what if your interpretation leads nowhere? David met her gaze directly. Then we'll know for certain, and you can make your decisions based on complete information instead of assumptions. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. The environmental systems hummed quietly around them, and the distant sounds of station life filtered through the walls. David could see Kira weighing options, calculating risks, trying to determine whether hope was worth the potential cost. Very well, she said at last. But when this proves futile, I expect you to leave me in peace. Deal. But as David began setting up the scanner, he was already thinking past futility toward possibility. Because sometimes the difference between broken and different was just a matter of perspective. The scanner's soft blue light painted strange shadows across Kira's angular features as David ran the diagnostic sequence. Her neural patterns appeared on the small display in cascading waves of color, each representing different aspects of brain function. To most people, it would look like abstract art. To David, who had spent countless hours studying similar readouts during his medical training, it told a story. Your motor cortex shows significant disruption, he said, tracing patterns on the screen with his finger. But look at this. The damage isn't random. It's very specific, almost surgical in its precision. Kira leaned closer, her trembling hands folded carefully in her lap. The physicians explained that neural disruptors target the connections between conscious thought and physical action. They called it a merciful weapon because it disables without killing. Merciful. David's voice carried a bitter edge that surprised them both. That's one word for it. Something in his tone made Kira study his face more carefully. You have encountered such weapons before. Different technology, same result. We called them nerve agents back on Earth, chemical compounds that severed the connection between mind and muscle. David's hands moved over the scanner controls with practiced efficiency, but Kira noticed how his jaw tightened. I treated a lot of soldiers who were exposed. Most of them didn't survive long enough for the effects to matter. But some did. David pulled up another layer of the scan, highlighting areas where neural pathways had attempted to reroute around the damage. The brain is remarkably adaptive. When primary connections are severed, it tries to establish secondary ones. In humans, we sometimes saw partial recovery over months or years. The Valari physicians dismissed such possibilities. They said our neural architecture is too rigid for significant adaptation. Maybe they're right. Or maybe they weren't looking in the right places. David pointed to a cluster of activity in an unexpected region of Kira's brain. This is interesting. Your visual processing centers are hyperactive, almost like they're compensating for something. Kira frowned. Compensating for what? I'm not sure yet. But in some of the human cases I saw, when the brain couldn't send reliable signals to the muscles, it began processing sensory information differently. Enhanced pattern recognition, improved spatial awareness, sometimes even predictive capabilities. You're suggesting that my injury might have created other abilities? I'm suggesting that your brain is trying to adapt, whether you know it or not. David saved the scan data and turned to face her fully. Tell me something. When you're not actively trying to control your movements, what do you notice about your environment? The question seemed to puzzle Kira. I don't understand. Right now, for instance. We're sitting in this chamber talking. What are you aware of besides our conversation? Kira's eyes unfocused slightly as she considered the question. The air circulation pattern changed 17 minutes ago when you adjusted the environmental controls. The vibration frequency from the main processing unit, 3 levels above us, shifted 4 minutes ago, suggesting a minor fluctuation in power distribution. The humidity increased by approximately 2% in the last hour, indicating either a leak in the water recycling system or an increase in occupancy somewhere in this section. David stared at her. You noticed all of that? Unconsciously? Such observations are basic situational awareness for any warrior. No, they're not. I've worked around military personnel for years, and none of them could provide that level of environmental detail without specifically focusing on it. David pulled up another section of her brain scan. Look at this. Your sensory processing is operating at about 140% of normal baseline. Your brain is using the neural capacity that used to control fine motor function for enhanced perception instead. Kira studied the readout with growing confusion. Even if that were true, what use is enhanced perception without the ability to act on it? That depends on how you define action. David began packing up the scanner, his mind racing with possibilities. What if physical combat isn't the only way to be a warrior? Now you sound like the rehabilitation counselors. No, I don't. Think I do. They were trying to convince you to be something other than a warrior. I'm asking whether there might be different ways to be exactly what you are. Before Kira could respond, a distant alarm echoed through the station's corridors. Not the emergency klaxons that signaled immediate danger, but the steady pulse that indicated a security sweep in progress. Both of them froze, listening as the sound grew gradually closer. They're searching the maintenance sections, Kira said, her enhanced awareness immediately cataloging the direction and intensity of the alert. Deck by deck, starting from the outer rings. David checked his chronometer. That's ahead of schedule. Something must have triggered a non-routine inspection. How long before they reach this level? 20 minutes, maybe 30 if they're being thorough. David was already moving, gathering the few supplies they had and checking exit routes. We need to get you somewhere else. Where? Kira's voice remained calm, but David could see the tension in her posture. I cannot hide indefinitely, and I cannot leave the station. Actually, you might not need to hide at all. David paused. In his preparations, a new idea taking shape. What if instead of hiding from station security, we gave them a reason to overlook your presence? I don't understand. Every system on this station is monitored by sensors and diagnostic programs. But the software isn't perfect. It misses things, makes mistakes, creates blind spots where problems develop. David's excitement was building as he spoke. The maintenance department has been requesting additional personnel for months to handle system analysis and predictive failure assessment. What if you weren't a refugee hiding from deportation, but a consultant helping to improve station efficiency? Kira's eyes widened. You're suggesting deception. I'm suggesting recontextualization. Everything I just told you about your enhanced perception abilities is true. You could legitimately help identify problems before they become emergencies. And in exchange? In exchange, you'd have official status on the station. A reason to be here that doesn't depend on your medical condition or your cultural background. The security alarms were getting closer, and David could hear voices in the corridors above them. They were running out of time to make a decision. There's something you should know, Kira said suddenly, about why the security sweep began. David looked at her sharply. What do you mean? 3 hours ago, I detected unusual electromagnetic signatures from the outer docking ring. Patterns consistent with unauthorized scanning or surveillance equipment. Her hands trembled as she spoke, but her voice remained steady. I've been monitoring the situation, but I cannot act on the information without revealing my presence. You've been conducting your own security analysis? Old habits. A warrior observes threats, even when she cannot address them directly. David felt pieces clicking into place in his mind. What kind of threats? The scanning patterns suggest someone is mapping the station's defensive capabilities and security protocols, either for intelligence gathering or as preparation for something more aggressive. Why didn't you report this? Kira's laugh was hollow. To whom? I'm officially deceased according to Valari records and medically discharged according to station files. Who would believe information from someone who doesn't exist? The voices above them were getting louder, and David could hear the distinctive sound of maintenance hatches being opened and checked. In a few minutes, they would reach this section. Come with me, David said, making a decision that surprised him with its certainty. Right now. We're going to report your findings to station security. That will expose my presence here. Yes, it will. But it will also demonstrate your value to the station's operations. David extended his hand to help her stand. Sometimes The best way to solve one problem is to help solve a bigger one. Kira stared at his outstretched hand for a long moment. Taking it would mean abandoning the relative safety of hiding. It would mean trusting not just David, but the entire station administration to see her as useful rather than problematic. If this fails, I will be deported to Valari space, where I will be executed for the dishonor of having survived my injuries. If this succeeds, you'll have a new life doing work that actually matters. And if I refuse? David kept his hand extended. Then I'll help you find another hiding place, and we'll hope the security threats you detected don't become a real problem for everyone on this station. The sounds of the search were now clearly audible in the adjacent chambers. Kira looked at David's hand, then at his face, then back at his hand. When she finally reached out and clasped his fingers with her trembling ones, David felt the significance of the moment settle between them like a shared weight. "Very well," she said. "Let us see if a broken warrior can still protect those who cannot protect themselves." As they prepared to emerge from the hidden chamber and face whatever consequences awaited, David realized that something fundamental had shifted. He was no longer just helping someone in need. He was partnering with someone whose capabilities he was only beginning to understand. Walking through the station corridors with Kira felt like defusing a bomb in slow motion. Every step brought them closer to a confrontation that could end in her immediate deportation, or, possibly, a chance at something neither of them had dared hope for. David led the way through maintenance passages he knew were unmonitored, while Kira's enhanced senses tracked security personnel movements 3 corridors away. "Security Chief Martinez will be in the Central Command Center," David said as they approached the main administrative deck. "She's practical fair, but she doesn't tolerate deception. Then we will provide her with truth." Kira's voice carried the formal cadence she used when preparing for battle, though her battles now were fought with words instead of weapons. "The electromagnetic signatures I detected are consistent with military reconnaissance patterns. Someone is studying this station's vulnerabilities." They reached the command center's outer checkpoint, where 2 security officers immediately tensed at the sight of an unregistered Valari in the company of a maintenance worker. David recognized Officer Thompson, a young human who took regulations seriously, and Officer Zex, a methodical Centaurian whose 4 arms were already moving toward different pieces of equipment. "Chen, what's the situation here?" Thompson stepped forward, his hand resting on his communication device. "This individual isn't showing up in our visitor registry." "That's because she's not a visitor," David said carefully. "This is Kira Velthanis, former guardian of the Northern Reaches. She has critical security information for Chief Martinez." Officer Zex's compound eyes shifted between David and Kira, processing details at the accelerated rate typical of his species. "The name appears in our medical discharge records from 6 days ago, but departure was logged 3 days past. How is this individual still present?" Kira stepped forward, her trembling hands clasped behind her back in a gesture that maintained dignity while acknowledging her physical limitations. "I remained on the station to monitor suspicious activities that posed potential threats to all residents. The information I gathered requires immediate attention." "What kind of threats?" Thompson's posture shifted from suspicion to alert concern. "Unauthorized scanning of defensive systems, mapping of critical infrastructure, and pattern analysis of security rotation schedules," Kira replied without hesitation. "Someone is conducting detailed reconnaissance of this facility." Officer Zex's 4 hands moved simultaneously across his control panel, pulling up security logs and scanning protocols. "No unusual activities have been flagged by our monitoring systems. Because the scanning is using frequencies and methods designed to avoid detection by standard security protocols," Kira said. "The perpetrators understand your systems well enough to work around them." Thompson looked between David and Kira, clearly weighing procedures against potential threats. "Chief Martinez needs to hear this directly. But I have to warn you, if this turns out to be some kind of elaborate scheme to avoid deportation orders, then I will accept whatever consequences arise, Kira finished. But if I am correct about the threat, and we waste time with bureaucratic concerns while hostile forces complete their preparations, the consequences will affect everyone on this station. The command center's main chamber buzzed with activity as shift changes brought fresh personnel to monitoring stations. Chief Martinez stood near the central display, reviewing daily reports with the efficiency of someone who had learned to prioritize immediate threats over administrative details. She was a compact woman whose gray hair and weathered hands spoke of decades in security work, but her eyes remained sharp and alert. "Chief, we have a situation that requires your attention," Thompson announced as they approached. Martinez looked up from her reports, her gaze immediately focusing on Kira with the intensity of a professional threat assessment. "I'm listening." David had prepared several ways to begin the explanation, but Kira spoke first, her voice carrying the crisp authority of someone briefing a superior officer. "Chief Martinez, I am Kira Valfanis. During the past 6 days, I have observed coordinated surveillance activities targeting the station's defensive and operational systems. The scanning patterns suggest preparation for either intelligence extraction or hostile action. You've been conducting unauthorized surveillance of my station for 6 days?" Martinez's tone was dangerously calm. "I have been fulfilling my obligations as a warrior to identify and report threats to civilian populations," Kira replied without flinching. "My medical condition may have ended my career, but it did not end my duty." Martinez studied Kira's trembling hands and rigid posture, clearly recognizing the contradiction between physical vulnerability and military bearing. "Show me what you found." For the next 20 minutes, Kira provided a detailed analysis that left the entire command center staff silent. She described scanning frequencies, timing patterns, and equipment signatures with the precision of someone who had spent a lifetime studying military technology. She identified specific vulnerabilities in the station's sensor grid and explained how an experienced reconnaissance team could exploit blind spots in their monitoring systems. "The most concerning activity occurred in Grid 7 Alpha," Kira continued, her hands steady now that she was focused on tactical analysis. "Someone conducted detailed structural scans of the reactor containment systems. That information serves no purpose except to plan either sabotage or targeted assault." Martinez pulled up the relevant sensor logs on her display, cross-referencing them with Kira's observations. "Our systems show normal background radiation for that period. Because the scans were conducted using adaptive frequency modulation that mimics natural electromagnetic fluctuations," Kira explained. "It's a technique used by Volari intelligence operatives, but it requires sophisticated equipment and extensive training." "You're suggesting that Volari forces are conducting reconnaissance on this station?" "I'm suggesting that someone with access to advanced Volari technology is gathering intelligence about your defensive capabilities. Whether they are officially sanctioned operatives or rogue elements using stolen equipment, the threat remains the same." David watched the exchange with growing admiration for Kira's analytical abilities. She wasn't just reporting observations. She was conducting a comprehensive threat assessment that demonstrated strategic thinking at the highest level. Martinez turned to her chief analyst, a sharp-eyed Terran woman named Singh. "Can you verify these scanning patterns?" "I'll need to recalibrate our sensors to detect the specific frequency she described," Singh replied, already pulling up technical specifications. "Give me 10 minutes." During the wait, Martinez focused her attention on David. "How did you become involved in this situation, Chen?" "I found her during routine maintenance in the lower sections. She was..." David chose his words carefully. "She was dealing with the conflict between her medical discharge and her continued sense of duty to protect others. She was hiding from deportation orders." She was trying to reconcile her cultural obligations with her physical limitations, David corrected. When she told me about the security threats she'd detected, I realized this was bigger than individual problems. "Chief," Singh called out, her voice tight with concern. "I'm detecting the scanning patterns she described. They're subtle, but they're definitely there. Someone has been conducting systematic reconnaissance of our entire facility." The command center erupted into controlled activity as staff members began deeper analysis of the threat. Martinez stood at the center of it all, making rapid decisions about security protocols and defensive measures. "Shira Velfanis," she said, turning back to the former warrior, "your observations have potentially prevented a serious security breach. The question now is what we do about your status on this station." Kira straightened as much as her condition allowed. "I understand that I have violated deportation procedures. I am prepared to accept whatever consequences you determine appropriate. Actually, you've demonstrated that you possess exactly the kind of analytical capabilities we need for our security assessment team," Martinez replied. "Our current staff is excellent at monitoring known threats, but we've been lacking expertise in advanced reconnaissance techniques." David felt his breath catch. The possibility he had hardly dared suggest was actually being offered. "Are you proposing employment?" Kira asked, her voice carefully neutral. "I'm proposing that we find a way for your skills to benefit this station's security while addressing your need for legitimate status here," Martinez said. "But first, we need to deal with whoever has been conducting surveillance on my facility." As alarms began sounding throughout the station and security teams mobilized to address the identified threats, David realized that everything had changed. Kira was no longer a refugee hiding from cultural shame. She was becoming a valuable member of the station's defense team. The transformation wasn't complete yet, but something fundamental had shifted. The woman who had been written off as broken was proving herself essential in ways no one had expected. The hostile reconnaissance ship was intercepted 12 hours later, exactly where Kira's analysis had predicted it would attempt to extract intelligence. Security teams found advanced scanning equipment and detailed schematics of Meridian stations, critical systems, confirming every aspect of her threat assessment. Chief Martinez stood in the command center reviewing the operation's success while Kira worked at a newly assigned analyst station, her trembling hands moving across holographic displays with surprising precision. The enhanced perception that had developed from her neural damage allowed her to spot patterns and anomalies that traditional security protocols missed entirely. "Your first official day on the security staff, and you've already prevented what could have been a catastrophic breach," Martinez observed. David approached carrying 2 cups of real coffee, a luxury he had traded maintenance favors to obtain. "How does it feel to be officially employed again?" Kira accepted the coffee gratefully, her violet eyes bright with something that looked remarkably like contentment. "Different than I expected. I am still Valari, still a warrior, but the battlefield has changed." "The Valari Council's opinion hasn't changed, though," David said gently. "No, but mine has." Kira's hands steadied as she spoke with quiet conviction. "I discovered that being broken and being valuable are not mutually exclusive. Perhaps that is a lesson worth sharing." Around them, the station hummed with life and purpose, no longer threatened by unseen enemies. 2 beings who had found each other in the depths of their respective failures had created something neither could have achieved alone. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.